And this is a resolution on approval of 4 storage projects with contracts through PG&E. It's an interesting project, so please. We're going to hear from Simon Baker, and he's here with Rachel McMahon, who is the analyst on this resolution.
Good morning, President Picker and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Simon Baker, Deputy Director of Energy Division. And I just want to say it's been a great opportunity for me to be here today and hear the community and a lot of the words that have been spoken about the issues before the Commission in the San Joaquin Valley proceeding. A number of my staff report to me, and I've not yet had an opportunity to go to one of the public participation hearings. The Energy Division Director, Ed Randolph, has had an opportunity, so it was just good for me to hear the community today, so thank you for that. As was said, I'm also accompanied by Rachel McMahon, the assigned analyst for this resolution, and she's here to answer any questions that I may not be able to answer. So, Resolution E4949. This resolution approves PG&E Advice Letter 5322E, which contains 567.5 megawatts of energy storage projects in the South Bay Moss Landing sub-area. 3 of these projects, totaling 385 megawatts, would be owned and operated by third parties, and 1 project totaling 182.5 megawatts would be constructed by Tesla and then owned by PG&E. Because the projects are needed for local reliability, their costs would be recovered from all ratepayers through a cost allocation mechanism. And if the actual cost for the proposed utility-owned project exceeds the projected costs specified in this advice letter, then PG&E must file an application for reasonableness review. PG&E is also required to submit a report to the Energy Division annually with estimated greenhouse gas impacts of the projects, starting 1 year after the first project achieves commercial online date. So this slide shows a little bit more detail about the 4 projects in question. The first is a 300 megawatt Dynegy project. It's a capacity-only project. This one's third-party owned with a contract duration of 20 years and a commercial online date of 2020. All of these projects have online dates of 2020 with the exception of the behind-the-meter project, which I'll get to next. This chart also shows what the net market value and the portfolio-adjusted value of these projects was as presented by PG&E in their advice filing. And PG&E selected the most cost-effective projects that were received in the solicitation, and they all had positive net market value and portfolio-adjusted values. The second project is the Hummingbird Energy Storage Project. It's a 75 megawatt project. Also a capacity-only third-party project for a 15-year duration. And as is the case with all these projects, this is lithium-ion technology. The third project, this is a behind-the-meter project, and it is a 10 megawatt project, capacity only, third-party owned. And as I said, the online date is sooner, it's in 2019. And then the fourth project, this is a 182 megawatt project that would be developed by Tesla and owned by PG&E under an EPC contract, and then commercial online date by 2020. So in total, these 4 projects, they yield an estimated net benefit to ratepayers of $233 million over 10 years, and that's in comparison to a benchmark of the reliability must-run contract for the Metcalf. And then there's also a benchmark for the capacity procurement mechanism soft cap price. So this procurement was responsive to PUC direction in a resolution from January of this year, Resolution 4909, in which PG&E was directed to seek preferred resource alternatives to reduce the need for CAISO reliability must run contracts for several specific generators that were identified. That resolution authorized PG&E to hold competitive solicitations for energy storage or preferred resources to meet specific local area needs in the Pease, Bogue, and South Bay Moss Landing subareas, to reduce or eliminate the need for reliability must-run contracts for 3 gas-fired plants, the Feather River plant, the Yuba City plant, and the Metcalf Energy Centers. That resolution also required PG&E to consider all new and planned transmission solutions and to consult with the CAISO to ensure that its portfolio reduces or eliminates the need for these gas-fired plants in any year from the 2019 through 2022 period. This resolution finds that PG&E's advice letter is consistent with the prior commission directive given to PG&E. It finds that the reliability issues in the South Bay Moss Landing sub-area remain, even with the $14 million in transmission upgrades that were approved in the CAISO's 2017-2018 transmission plan. It also finds that the directives of the original resolution 4909 remain relevant, as the market conditions and the increased demand in the area may justify new RMR agreements or the extension of existing RMR agreements. It approves all 4 projects and finds that the projects procured by PG&E hold significant value to PG&E ratepayers and overall reliability. And it finds that PG&E met requirements in the original resolution to consult with CAISO, as well as finding that the 4 projects meet current local reliability criterion both for dispatch, duration, and location. So as was said back in January, the Commission issued this directive, and then subsequently in March, the CAISO approved transmission upgrades to mitigate 400 to 600 megawatts of need in the South Bay Moss Landing area. Subsequent to that, in May, the CAISO adopted its 2023 Local Capacity Technical Report, which, following on an adjustment to the CEC's load forecast, the new CEC load forecast, it showed that the local sub-area need increased by 300 megawatts in 2023. And so this chart here basically shows the public information that's available for the supply stack in the Moss Landing South Bay sub-area. The areas that are fully colored in, those are currently known to be under contract with PG&E or another party. And the hatch-marked areas indicate where contracts are expired or the status of contracting is uncertain. So you can see also there's a red line here which shows what the LCR need is for this sub-area. And the need drops in 2019 there because that's that additional transmission upgrade that happened, the 400 to 600 megawatts of transmission upgrades. But then the line goes back up out to 2023 there where you see a mark, and that's where the new CAISO LCR study showed an increase in load in the area of about 300 megawatts. My understanding is that's from some growth in the Silicon Valley area from server loads and so forth. And so so really this shows a picture of the uncertainty that's out there in terms of what's actually under contract. And it also shows us, we know that these units that could potentially be contracted in this area are owned by just 2 companies. Everything is owned by Vistra Dynegy or by Calpine. And so this really tells us that there remains to be uncertainty in the area with regard to the local area need, primarily due to the uptick in need that's shown there in the red line. And we're also, the resolution puts forward that there remains to be market power issues that are of sufficient concern. This next slide basically just shows additional background, which I think I've already gone over. So with that, I will take any questions from the commissioners.
Commissioners? Anybody wish to speak to this? Okay. Commissioner Guzman-Aceves, do you want to kick it off?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for giving a little glimpse to the public about the information that we get much more in detail about. I struggled a lot with this particular decision. And one of my main reasons was not so much the forecasted need and in the area, and particularly given that we directed the utility to look at cleaner resources in the area. But really, what was difficult for me was the uncertainty of whether or not this net present value for these contracts was actually accurate. And I do want to acknowledge and thank the parties for spending a lot of time with my office and certainly the staff in going through this issue at length. And there is this uncertainty here. We do know for sure that we need this flex power, and we have value to that flex power, but we don't know the actual nominal amount of that. So I do want to acknowledge that there is, this level of uncertainty in a lot of our planning for the future, and certainly for this newer type of infrastructure. I also would have preferred for the third-party contracts to have dispatch provisions to ensure this uncertainty was more contained. But in the end, I did find that the assumptions that were made by PG&E, again at our direction, were sound. And overall, any of that uncertainty is certainly outweighed by the need to have this type of flex power in this area and growing throughout the state. So I want to thank the staff, in particular, Rachel, who is here today, Michelle Keto and Jamie Gannon for spending so much time and running through the numbers with me. And I do want to thank the parties again for spending the time and really helping me hone in on the difference. But I am happy to support this resolution today, and I want to acknowledge and thank the utility for stepping up and meeting, going far beyond what we expected that they would propose to us in our original direction.
Commissioner Peterman?
Thank you. I also want to echo my thanks to Energy Division staff, particularly Rachel McMahon, Gabe Petlin, Jamie Gannon, and Michelle Keto for all of their hard work and analysis on the resolution, and in particular for their creative thinking in a very short period of time regarding what competitive options there might be to traditional generation solutions. Providing reliability is a necessary key element of what we do, and so I appreciate staff's and PG&E's efforts to figure out how to do that while staying on track with our clean energy goals. I agree with Commissioner Guzman-Aceves' comment that we are dealing in a time we are planning our system where there are some uncertainties around what the need will be, uncertainty about some of the values that these new resources will bring online. I, however, in this situation, did not find this a hard decision. We're always dealing with that uncertainty. I think what we had in this case, which has been different sometimes in the past, that we are dealing with forecasts that are pretty recent. And I've been troubled more sometimes when we're having to make our decisions on a record and analysis that is several years old. And so I appreciate how quickly this process has turned around. And we do our best to make the best decisions we can, given that we know there's a need here and also there's some cost implications. And so I do appreciate the concerns that have been raised by ratepayer advocates about cost. And I will say that always has us sharpen our pencils and look closely at each matter before us. But in this case, I am comfortable with the analysis that Energy Division has done and PG&E has done around the need here and the ability of these projects to fulfill it. I also greatly appreciate the use of the existing infrastructure to support these projects, particularly the Moss Landing Energy Storage Project, where PG&E will be using the property and footprint and shell of an existing natural gas plant. I think it's, to be frank, a beautiful thing if we can take our existing infrastructure that has provided value to the state of California, but is not providing all the values we want going forward, and particularly less polluting options, to take that footprint, to take that infrastructure and transform it into the energy system that we need. We need to do more of that. It's leveraging those existing assets, which keeps these project costs down and helps to manage some of the cost concerns we have going forward. And Lastly, in response to some party comments, I think it is important for staff to continue to monitor these projects to see if any changes should be done to our existing land use, siting, and permitting process, including potential changes to GO 131D, and particularly if we begin to see more utility-owned energy storage systems of this scale. And again, this is the first time we are conducting a storage procurement of this scale for this purpose with long-term contracts to avoid future RMR procurement. We hope to not have to invest in these projects as well and invest in other ones to meet the same need going forward. So I do strongly support the latest revisions to the resolution, directing Energy Division to continue to monitor the operations of these 4 projects and report back to the Commission if needed. With that, I am pleased to support this resolution.
I will also be supporting the resolution. As the staff presentation indicated, there are both resource sufficiency issues in that area and market power issues in that local area, and I think this resolution helps address that. The 567 megawatts in this resolution, combined with some of the programmatic changes we are considering in the resource adequacy program, will hopefully go a long way to ensure that we have enough resources on the grid to meet reliability standards at costs lower than RMR contracts. It's encouraging that CAISO was able to identify inexpensive transmission upgrades to meet the 2019 local needs. But it's clear, based on the recent data, that local and resource needs are increasing in the area. And as the resource stack Simon shared with us indicates, there are a lot of uncertainties regarding a lot of the resources in that area, including the Gilroy Cogen unit. So together, these factors demonstrate to me that there's still a need for these storage resources. I know that some of the parties indicated that an application process would be better for utility-owned generation. However, I feel this would result in unnecessary delay. We have precedent for authorizing new resources via advice letter, and I'm supportive of moving forward at this time. And I also want to note that as large as these projects are, they're only one step in addressing the broader challenge we face in managing the fossil fuel fleet. The near to midterm market power issues and resource efficiency issues we've seen in this subarea are not unique and may take us a few years to completely resolve. I would like to avoid one-off procurement authorizations like this in the future to the extent we can, and have had many conversations with staff in both the resource adequacy proceeding and the IRP proceeding about how to be thinking about these issues in a more systemic way. And I'm hoping we can come up with some solutions going forward as soon as we can. And again, I want to echo my thanks to the Energy Division staff, Rachel McMahon, Jamie Gannon, and Michelle Keto for all of their work on this proceeding. All 3 of these individuals are a huge asset to the Commission. Their expertise is deep and their knowledge extensive, and I really appreciate all of their work. And I also want to thank my staff member, Joanna Gubman, for her work on this proceeding. Thank you.
I want to echo my thanks to the staff who spent a lot of time with me in my office, and I completely agree with what Commissioner Randolph just said. They're a real treasure to have at the Commission. I think this is a very good decision to be voting on. There's a lot of elegance to it, as Commissioner Peterman said. And when we first directed PG&E to do this procurement, I certainly didn't know quite what to expect. Rachel probably did, but probably few of the rest of us knew that we would get such competitively priced bids, and that's extremely encouraging. And it does speak very, very well that we're using batteries to help provide reliability services and displace the need for fossil generation. That's very, very positive. My main concern with the application, with the resolution, is that I would have preferred to see the application for the utility-owned generation resources proceed by way of an application rather than this advice letter. A substantial portion of the overall project costs will go into that utility-owned generation asset. I think when we authorize spending on utility-owned assets, we have a special obligation to make sure that the investments are prudent. And as my colleague said, we're dealing with uncertainty here. We all accept that, but the projects, the overall valuation for the utility-owned generation is based on assumptions about the market revenues that will be realized as the project operates. Those haven't been tested by the evidentiary challenges of a full application with parties commenting back and forth. There's some risk in case the third party who developed the battery goes out of business, can't perform, that I would have liked to see us evaluate more. And in this case, while I don't disagree at all about the need for all of the storage projects to meet the demand in 2023, there is no longer an immediate need to deploy the assets right now. We have until 2023, so even if there is more time, we have the time to deal with that. I recognize that. I also think it's important to put this in the broader context of some of the changes that are going on right now. The resolution appropriately talks about the concerns about market power in the area. We're trying to address those in other contexts, including our resource adequacy proceeding. We're also dealing in a very fast-changing customer choice environment where we have community choice aggregation districts who have said in their comments that they would like the ability to procure some of these same storage resources, and if we had an application, we could get the benefit of comments like that. And while it's true we did authorize utility-owned storage assets in response to the Aliso Canyon situation without an application, that was truly an urgent need. We don't have that urgent need right now. So I think the better practice is for projects of this size to go through a more formal application process. Hopefully, as Commissioner Randolph says, we won't have these one-off processes. More generally, that this kind of procurement will be discussed and planned for in the context of our integrated resource planning and other longer-term evaluations. But as I said, overall, it's a very good decision to have to vote on because we have 4 storage projects that are displacing fossil fuel resources.
So I'll also be supporting the resolution, but I'm going to also take your time to chew the fat. This is somewhat unusual. It's a very expensive project to come up under resolution, but it is a response to a request that we made, and it falls solidly within the terms of that request. So I ultimately am not so troubled by the legal framework that it comes back to us, although I'll just say that there are some complications that we need to think about. And I would just encourage people who are advocating go at your own way strategies for meeting your electrical needs. The kind of complications that we're seeing here because of changes in technology and lumpiness in our electricity markets should be a caution. It's not the argument you shouldn't go ahead, but you need to start to think about all the things that we have to do to make sure that the lights stay on and that the voltage stays at 60 cycles, all of which are probably as important as the kind of generation that we have. So beyond that, I'm just going to point out some of the really interesting elements. Some of them are complicated, but I will say that one thing that I note here is that this is similar to a phenomenon we observed when the San Onofre nuclear generating station went down, where rather than specifying a specific technology or a specific solution, we told the utility to go out and find what you can get, and that was preferred resources. Rather than saying generation, PG&E has come back to us with a different kind of a solution. It is a use of a technology to optimize our existing electricity supply. It's using batteries to soak up excess solar during certain parts of the day, and so that it can be available on those days in the late summer when we tend to have not enough electricity to meet the state's cooling needs. So this runs counter to people's assumptions about what we will get when we go out to procure. Rather than procuring more electricity generation, which is the solution that we've deployed in the past by having these expensive contracts for natural gas peakers, we've done some expensive contracts for battery storage, which allows us to use our existing clean energy resources more effectively. It's an optimization strategy. And while it's expensive, it's still cheaper than having those contracts with the natural gas peakers, which is why I think we're moving ahead with it. And that was because we didn't say go out and get more renewables. We said come back with a solution that's non-carbon. So I underline that point to people, that you have to really understand that the world is changing faster than sometimes our attitudes do. I will say that this is somewhat counter to other expectations that we've had. So our partners in New York at NYSERDA and their Public Services Commission and at their energy advisors have been assuming for many years that use of these locally distributed energy resources would reduce the need for more transmission and distribution wires. And they've been banking a lot on this actually helping them to avoid improvements to their grid. What we're seeing here is it's actually improvements to the grid and the use of these locally centered resources that are actually avoiding the need for new generation. So that's actually runs counter to an intense national conversation. We've seen that elsewhere in California, including the phenomenon that Commissioner Rexhoffen was talking about, where Southern California Edison put some batteries on their substation to help overcome some of the electricity reliability concerns because of the loss of the natural gas storage facilities at Aliso Canyon. So these are all fast emerging, fast-paced events that are very hard sometimes for us to deal with in our lengthy proceedings. And while it's good to litigate these things and have a lot of public consideration, sometimes you do have to move fast. A couple other issues are the fact that when we use these run-must-run contracts, which is a contract for a partially dormant or fully dormant natural gas peaker in a place where you can't get electricity through the transmission system from outside to meet local needs, because again, the system is very lumpy. It's not, the electrons go where they're going to go, not where you have political jurisdictions or where you have the design of the grid. It goes where it's going to go. Sometimes you have to have generation to overcome that lumpiness. And the RMR contracts are part of the independent system operators process to meet those reliability needs, and they go in their transmission access charge to all ratepayers. Here, it'll primarily be paid by PG&E ratepayers. There's a little mismatch in terms of who actually is getting the benefits and who is paying for it under some circumstances. So it's going to be very, very, very situational. So this is something that probably ought to be considered in other proceedings like our resource adequacy proceedings, which is where we normally think about how we meet the long-term need for those things that help provide local reliability and how we actually have people pay for it. I think that I don't know that an application would solve that problem. I just think that this is a longer-term challenge for us to figure out the future as it's happening to us faster than we can actually sometimes catch up to it. One of the other things is that at the same time that we were considering this, our partners at the Independent Systems Operator were looking at short-term transmission solutions. And so the first 2 years of the longer period that we were probably looking at when we started this are now being met by these transmission solutions. But this provides a solution into the years, 10 years forward, and it's still cheaper than using those very centrally owned kind of non-competitive gas peakers. And so I think that on balance, it's a good choice. But it's not the obvious one that we would have projected a year ago, 2 years ago, or even maybe 9 months ago. And that's why the commissioners are asking so many questions about it. I think Commissioner Rexhoffen talked a little bit about, Commissioner Guzman Aceves talked a little bit about whether we should have some requirements that for the privately owned battery storage rather than the utility owned, that there has to be a must offer contract. So, you know, that's a fair issue. But again, it's the kind of thing that probably would be hard for us to do based on the way that we made the call, and probably has to be dealt with in some of our other long-term proceedings. And I think that the issue here is, again, the world's changing very quickly. We have more flexible electricity needs than we ever anticipated a long time ago. We have new technologies. All these are requiring us to be more nimble and to change the way we think about things. And so for all these reasons, I think this is a good choice, and I will join with my colleagues in making this a unanimous vote. Could Clerk please read the roll?
For item 10, Commissioner Guzman Aceves,
Aye.
Commissioner Peterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Randolph,
Aye.
Commissioner Redchefin,
No.
President.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I saw that coming.
We got to keep some suspense, not just when you read the hold list. There's got to be suspense in the actual votes.
President Picker,
Aye. So this motion is adopted. Thank you.
Commissioner, do you want to reserve your right to do anything?
No.
Okay.
He just wants to keep the suspense out there.
I think I've made my point already. I don't need to burden anyone with it.
Right.
Can I make one other comment?
Sure, Commissioner Peterman.
Yeah, I just want to note that at the subcommittee meeting before our last business meeting in October, we had a great presentation from Energy Division staff on the status of our energy storage market and our energy storage procurement. And staff solicited feedback from the commissioners about subject matter to go into a potential future rulemaking on energy storage. And so I'll just remind us of that conversation again, because I think this resolution did bring up a lot of interesting issues, not just about resource adequacy and resource planning, but also storage as a asset class as well. And so commissioners, do consider if some of the questions that you had here, if there's anything that you think would be appropriate to be focused on by the storage rulemaking, to make sure you follow up with Rachel and Simon on that.
I think the cost allocation issue that President Picker alluded to is very interesting. If these are transmission assets, why are they being, why is the cost recovery through a distribution rate base? So that's one issue to.
Or are they generation assets?
Or are they generation assets? But I think it's an interesting and important question.
Yeah.